Hi guys, this video is going to be a little bit different to what I would normally do. I'm actually going to talk a little bit about music theory and music notation. So, note values is the topic I'm going to talk about. So if any of you guys read music, you might find this a little bit interesting, just the same way that I did. Okay, so really, there's kind of 7 common note values that we use today. Now, a note value basically means the length of each particular note. So we have, the 7 most sort of common ones are these here. I've written them down. So you've got like this semi-breve, minim, crotchet, quaver, semi-quaver, and so on. And basically, each one down the list is worth half the value of the one before. So a good way that the Americans have kind of put a nice, simpler system to learning these is just by calling them whole notes. So a semi-breve is a whole note, which means it's got 4 beats in it. So it feels like a common time. A common time signature would be 4 beats per bar. A semi-breve would fill that bar, it would fill it fully, so they call it a whole note because it's the whole bar. And a minim, which is worth half of a whole note, is called a half note. And a crotchet, there's 4 crotchets in a semi-breve, so they call it a quarter. They call it a quarter note because there's 4 quarters to a whole. And just makes it a little bit more simple and easy to remember, the American way of doing it. And once you start going down here to the quavers and the semi-quavers and so on, they become sort of like 16th, 32nd notes and 64th notes and so on. What you'll find is with the actual appearance of the notes is we have a stick, like a stalk. We have the main sort of body of the note, if you like, and we have the stalk. And when you get to the quaver, to signify that it's an 8th note, it actually has like a little tail. We call this a flag, or I think there's another name for it, beam or something like that. So as you go down, a semi-quaver, which is worth half of a quaver, has 2 flags, and a demi-semi-quaver has 3 flags, and hemi-demi semi-quaver has hemi-demi semi-quaver. It's quite a tongue twister, that one, has 4 flags to it. So you can see why the Americans have put this much simpler way of naming these notes, because saying hemi-demi semi-quaver is not really too practical and it's a little bit unnecessary. But there's an interesting reason why they're actually called this. It's because they have a Latin derivative. So kind of semi signifies that it's half of a quaver. So semi-quaver is half of a quaver, and then a demi is half of a semi. So it kind of goes like that. And there's actually, believe it or not, there are actually some shorter notes still, which have some even more entertaining names. So the shorter notes are these ones here. I find them real tricky to draw with all the flags. As you can see, I'm not great at drawing. But these are actually, they're rather uncommon. This is why I've drawn them on a separate sheet, because the 7 ones that are most commonly used in most modern music that you'll find today, these are less common. So these are actually called semi, hemi, demi, semi-quaver, which is 128th note. So it's 128th of the semi-breve, or the whole note. And you even find one that a 256th note, which is a demi, semi, hemi, demi, semi-quaver. And yeah, 256th note, which is kind of ridiculous. That has 6 flags 6 flags or 6 beams on that note. The reason they're kind of so uncommon is because in most pieces of music with a normal, ordinary tempo, a 256th note would be inconceivable or indeterminable for a human brain. It would just sound like a consistent sound. It'd be too fast for the brain to process. So they're only really used in pieces of music that have a very, very slow tempo. So really nice slow pieces of music, and they would be used if you want to add a really fast run within that slow piece of music. So I've got a little bit of a thing, as you've noticed with the semi, the word semi and hemi and all this means half a value. So you probably might be thinking, just like I was, well, why is a semibreve, which is the longest one, why does that have the word semi in front of it? Doesn't seem to make sense. It kind of indicates that it could be worth half the value of another note. Well, the reason it being is because it is. That's not actually the longest note. There is a note that's longer. It's called, surprise, surprise, a breve. And it looks like that. It's called a double whole note in American. We don't find many of these because it's kind of, in most cases, it would be longer than a bar. So like in your sort of common time signature, you get 4 beats to the bar. Well, this would have 8 beats, so it'd be kind of worth 2 bars. You can't put that into many time signatures, so it makes it much less common. And also, in not lots of music, you wouldn't really put in a note that's worth that long, unless it's like an underlying sort of pedal note or sustained drone note or something like that. And even if you're going to write those into music, you commonly just use a tie, so you tie 2 semibreves together as opposed to draw one of these. So yeah, there's also another slight issue I've got with the word breve, because as these names have Latin, they're derived from Latin names. The word breve it comes from the word brevis in Latin. I think it's brevis anyway. Yeah, comes from the word brevis, which actually means brief. Now, I wouldn't describe a breve which has eight beats in it. I wouldn't describe that as brief. And if any of you guys speak Italian, I don't, but if you do, you'll be telling me that breve in Italian means short. So once again, you don't really call the longest note used in music to be short. And this is where things get a little bit historical. There are actually some even longer notes still, although they're not used today, and there's a good reason for that. Music dates back to, well, as long as we can really conceive. It's been around for God knows how long, and it was only until, I think it was like the 9th and 10th century, music was put into notation, so it was written down. The first form of music was actually what you call neume or neumes. In this time, which was the medieval era, music was written mostly for sacred chants. So if you listen to a lot of medieval holy music, it's very, very, very long sustained notes, choral music. So it's all voice, like a choir singing very, very long Latin names, all to do with the church and the Bible and so on. And these notes, the breves, or brevis in this time, these were actually some of the shortest notes used in this music, because the music was so long and drawn out, and each note was more syllabic rather than had a beat. It didn't really have much of a rhythm. it was all about the syllables of the words, of these Latin words to do with God and so on. So breve was actually one of the shortest notes used in the earliest forms of written music. So yeah, it is quite interesting. The notes that were more even longer than that aren't used today, but they are actually called. They have even longer notes. We have the longer, which is called a quadruple whole note, and we have the maxima, which is an octuple whole note. They look like this. They're not used in modern day music, but I've touched on them because it kind of explains why we call it a breve. Why is it called short? So these were in this type of music. It was actually a type of form of written music called mensural. Now, mensural is kind of a Latin word for measurable. So from the start of written music, there was one before mensural, and that was called, what was that called? I've had to write all this down because I found it rather interesting myself. Neum, so neumes in plural. So, like I say, music notation has evolved through time. It's evolved from the 9th to 10th century. The first form of this was a neum. So in this sacred music with real long notes, people before the 9th century would learn it by ear, and they decided that it would be a good idea to write the lyrics down, because many people couldn't read in these days. So the people that could read, they could write the lyrics down, and they also wanted to be able to kind of memorise where the notes go. So does it go higher in pitch, does it go lower in pitch? So on a neum, it would be like a little symbol that they draw above the word, above the lyric, and it would either go up, or it would go down, or it would go up and down, and that would signify that the music would kind of go up and down in pitch. So there was no actual sort of method of measuring the time in there. It was just like a rough indication of pitch. So as music evolved and as more people can read and write, from the 13th century onwards for another around 300 years to the early 17th century, was a type of music called mensural. So mensural is like a Latin name for measurable. So it's like a measured rhythmic. It's able to measure the rhythmic note values in this, and this is where these maximas and longas were used. They were introduced from the 13th century onwards up to around 1600 AD. So it's quite interesting. Now, from the sort of time of around the middle of the 17th century on to modern day, we introduced bars and a much more methodical way of reading music. So it put a time scale to it. So from the middle of the 17th century onwards, we had bar notation, or otherwise known as modern measure, which is what we describe as common music that's written today. And the great thing about that is a person doesn't have to have heard a piece of music to be able to play it. They can just, if you can sight read music, you can put this piece of music in front of you and you can play it perfectly, having never heard it before. Which is quite impressive considering all the different parameters of music that there are in music today. So they introduced things such as bars first and put a nice gridded time system to it. They even introduced things like key signatures and more subtle differences between notes and accentals, all that kind of stuff, which just makes it basically just covers all of music and how it's played. Things such as dynamics, performance instructions, ornaments, such as ways to decorate it, And yeah, it's really quite an interesting subject. So as music sort of evolved from the medieval time, the medieval period, music became more complex, and as we wanted to notate it, obviously notation became more complex as well. And with complexity comes speed, and with speed comes the need for shorter notes. Hence, these longers and maximas were just made. We didn't need these anymore, and hence why the breve or the semi-breve today is actually the most commonly used as the longest note. And we go down to these silly notes such as hemi, demi, semi-quavers and demi, semi, hemi, demi, semi-quavers and things like that. Yeah, so another interesting thing just about these longers and maximas, I've written down here, in this time there was no, in this mensural form of written music, there was, like I say, there was no bar system, no gridded time system, although it was measurable in time to a sense. So a longer could have been 2 or even 3 times longer than a breve, and or 4 or 6 times longer than a semi-breve. A maxima was 8, 12, 18 or 27 times longer than a semi-breve. Can you imagine having a note that's 27 times longer than a semi-breve, which is the longest note that we use today? That's very, very, very long. And you're probably wondering why is it 27 times longer and also potentially 8 times longer? Well, that's because, like I say, they didn't have this bar system, so it was all to do with context. So you could read these symbols, these on your music, and depending on the context of the song, they would be worth different amounts of time. So I think it was something like modes or forms or something like that, which sort of gave it, which put it into a category, a certain context. And it really was, reading music back then was you kind of had to perceive. You had to perceive it. It wasn't written in stone. So, like I say, music has evolved, and it's kind of reached a point today where we can just, everything's there that we need to see. So I think it's probably going to stay like that for the foreseeable future. I can't imagine it's going to evolve too much more, but who knows? It'd be interesting. So yeah, it's been quite a long video, but yeah, it's just a little interesting thing that I found interesting myself about written music, and hope you found it interesting too. And I'll see you later. Alright.